Strength in weakness. When we feel the most inadequate, we should consider it an opportunity to experience God's supernatural enablement. Here's Gene to explain.
In chapter 10 of Daniel, we have a record of another incredible experience. And I just want to read briefly from that experience that sets up really this principle. And it happened in the 3rd year of Cyrus, the king of Persia. A message was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. That was the name that was given to him by Nebuchadnezzar, really. The message was true and was about a great conflict. Now, we're going to look at this conflict when we look at the next principle. But this great conflict is absolutely incredible. And it had an impact on Daniel. He understood the message and had understanding of the vision. And we're going to see in our next principle what that actually was. In those days, Daniel, was mourning for 3 full weeks. In other words, this was a very traumatic experience. I didn't eat any rich food, no meat or wine entered my mouth, and I didn't put any oil on my body until the 3 weeks were over. On the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, I looked up. Now, here we have a vision that probably was almost identical to what happened to John when Jesus Christ appeared to him in the book of Revelation in chapter 1. Notice, I looked up and there was a man dressed in linen with a belt of gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like the brilliance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and feet like the gleam of polished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. Now, most people who read this and who study it very carefully believe that this was actually an Old Testament appearance of Jesus Christ. Now, notice what Daniel said as a result of this vision. I've called this Daniel's weakness. Only I, Daniel, saw the vision. The men who were with me did not see it, but a great terror fell on them, and they ran and hid. In other words, though they didn't see it, they heard, they experienced. Daniel saw it. And he says, I was left alone, looking at this great vision. No strength was left in me. My face grew deathly pale, and I was powerless. This is another one of those experiences in the presence of the Holy God. And of course, Jesus Christ was the incarnate Son of God. The Word became flesh and dwelled among us, and the Word was God. So here we have this Old Testament manifestation. And notice in verse 10, I call this God's strength. Suddenly, Daniel said, a hand touched me and raised me to my hands and knees. And this was probably Gabriel. He said to me, Daniel, you're a man treasured by God. We've seen that concept before as we've unfolded this book. Understand the words that I'm saying to you. Stand on your feet, for I have now been sent to you. And after he said this to me, I stood trembling. He was strengthened, but his knees were still wobbly, as it were. He was trembling because of this incredible experience. And as I was reflecting on Daniel's experience, of course, I reflected on John's experience on the Isle of Patmos when Jesus Christ appeared to him and told him to record what he was going to say to him. But I also thought of the Apostle Paul. And you remember that he was caught up into the 3rd heaven. And he said, I didn't know whether it was in the body or out of the body. But he said, I saw things that were so remarkable that I couldn't even record it. And then that is when he talks about the fact that he received a thorn in the flesh to keep him humble. The great Apostle Paul. But notice his positive response. He said, I requested 3 times that the thorn be removed, and God then said to me, 2 Corinthians 12:9, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. That's a powerful statement. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. And then he went on to record. And it's hard for me to identify with this, but this was Paul's experience. He said, so I take pleasure in weaknesses, insults, catastrophes, persecutions, and in pressure. When I'm experiencing all of these things, the thing that gives me pleasure, he says, for when I am weak, then I'm strong. And that, of course, indeed was what Daniel was experiencing as well. When he was weak, then he was strong. And God strengthened him for this wonderful experience of sharing with us these great truths about Jesus Christ and the future, and especially for his plan for Israel. So this comes to a reflection-response question when he says, in what specific ways does Paul's testimony to the Philippians apply to us all? Here's Paul's testimony when he was in prison. He was actually in prison the first time here. He was in prison a second time. But the first time he said this, I know both how to have a little and I know how to have a lot. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being content. Again, I have a tough time identifying with that. I wish I could always say that. Whether in abundance or in need. In other words, what he's simply saying is that there are times when I've had plenty to eat. I've had clothes on my back. I've had warmth. There are times when I've been cold and I've been persecuted and I've had needs. But he said, whether in abundance or in need, he said, I've learned the secret of being content. Wow. What an incredible lesson. And then he went on to say why he was able to do that. He said, I'm able to do all things through him who strengthens me, Jesus Christ. And in essence, that's what happened to Daniel. When Jesus appeared to him, this Old Testament manifestation of Jesus Christ, and when the angel, Gabriel, picked him up and strengthened him, the strength was the strength that God gave him in his weakness. My wife and I like to use a daily reading called The Upward Call, written by David Jeremiah. And a couple of days ago as we were reading, there was a section called From Weakness to Strength. And as I was reflecting on Daniel's experience, I was reflecting on what my wife and I had read. And basically, it's based on this verse, Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And then here are the words from Jeremiah. He says, in the several years following the diving accident that left her a quadriplegic, Johnny Erickson Todd has struggled with every imaginable emotion. She was helpless, but came to discover that God was not. The more she accepted her weaknesses and limitations, the greater her realization of God's strength arose within her. She has written, deny your weakness and you will never realize God's strength in you. Boy, that's a statement, isn't it? When Paul wrote the often quoted words found in Philippians 4:13, he was in prison. I can do all things through Christ is not a magic formula. It is not a promise that we can do anything we want. Rather, it is a promise that we can do anything God wants. I like that. Paul was confident God was orchestrating his life and was with him even in prison. He knew that what God expected of him, faith, endurance, perseverance, boldness, he would be able to accomplish, not through his own strength, but through the strength of the one who lived in him. If God is asking something of you today for which you feel inadequate, it's okay to agree that you are. Confessing your weakness is the first step towards allowing Christ to manifest his strength in you. So let's remember this principle to live by that comes from the life of Daniel. When we feel the most inadequate, we should consider it an opportunity to experience God's supernatural enablement.